Do you need home charging to live with an electric car? That's the question we're going to answer in this video after 3 months and thousands of kilometers with this MG4. We've driven it in the city, in the country, and done all manner of charging and range tests with it over our time. In this video, we're going to tell you our experiences with this car, answer your questions about it, tell you how much money and how much time we spent on charging, and of course, tell you a few tips and tricks along the way. Let's get started. When we collected our test vehicle, the entry-level MG4 Excite 51, it was priced from $39,990 drive away for model year 2023 stock. Since then, the price has reverted to $37,990 before on-road costs, or $40,996 drive away in New South Wales. The exact price now differs based on the state or territory of registration. Until October 31st, 2024, MG is offering the Excite 51 for just $30,990 drive away. That's $30,990, not $39,990. And that's a nationwide drive away price that doesn't differ between states and territories. It is powered by a 125 kilowatt, 250 newton meter electric motor driving the rear wheels, fed by a 50.8 kilowatt hour lithium iron phosphate battery pack, good for 350 kilometers of claimed driving range. MG claims a 0 to 100 kilometers per hour acceleration time of 7.7 seconds. We recorded a best of 7.8 seconds on satellite timing equipment in our testing, as well as a 100 km/h to zero braking distance of 38.2 meters, which is respectable for this type and size of car. The MG4 is now covered by a 10-year, 250,000 kilometre warranty, the longest in the Australian new car market, up from 7 years and limited kilometres previously. Rivals for the MG4 include the BYD Dolphin and GWM Aura, as well as conventional petrol small cars like the Toyota Corolla Hybrid. There are plenty of new and used examples of these cars available for purchase on Drive Marketplace. Head over to our website to check that out. Now, if you're after a more general overview of what the MG4 is like inside, on the outside, and what it's like to drive, I recommend you go watch our long-term intro video. Click the card up there in this video to go watch that first before you continue here. What we're going to talk about in this video is just things we've learned, some of the gripes, some of the tips and tricks over our time with this car in the Drive garage. Now, starting with the infotainment system, it's something I mentioned in the last update that I wasn't a big fan of. And when I first was driving an MG4 about 12 months ago, I didn't like it at first. But I will say, after a couple of months with this car, you can set the system up to make it work for you and just make it a bit easier to use. One of those things is the aircon control. So on face value, you might think you have to go into the screen, tap the aircon control on the home screen and do it that way. However, there is a workaround. These star buttons on the steering wheel, you can set them to control different functions of the car, including the aircon. So I've got the left one set up to be climate control. So when I'm in Apple CarPlay on Waze, Maps or Spotify or something like that, you can control fan speed by going left and right with this right button on the wheel and up and down to control your temperature. Now, to be honest, I was like to say that I prefer dials and buttons over this, but to be honest, this is actually one of the best climate control systems in any car I've driven. It's just so handy. Keep your hands on the wheel, press a button, and it's 2 tap. It's a fantastic system. And honestly, I wish every car had it. Every time I get into a car that's not the MG4 during the time we've had this in our garage, I just wish this feature existed. It's so good. And to be honest, a workaround to a problem that probably shouldn't have existed, but still a workaround we love anyway. Another thing we mentioned in the last video was the gear shifter and the way you start the car. So obviously there's no start button, as we mentioned in the previous video. You're meant to get in the car, close the door, and then put your foot on the brake. Now, if you get that sequence wrong, as in get in the car, foot on the brake, and then close the door, the car freaks out and the sequence doesn't work and it won't turn on as you expect. However, there is an override. You can double press the brake and it should, in theory, do that and override the sequence and then start the car as normal. It's not perfect. It does work most of the time. Maybe it's just user error. Now, another downside that you might not think of at first is because there's no start button and there's nowhere to tell the car that you've got out of it and that it's locked, is that when you open the door and get out of the car, your podcast or your music or the radio will continue to play at the same volume that you last had them. It's annoying, particularly if you like listening to embarrassing songs that you'd rather your neighbors not know you listen to. It's a bit annoying getting out of the car and still having your music blaring. You can hear it when you close the door and walk away from the car before you lock it. It only stops when you hit the lock button. That's when the car actually turns off properly. But overall, despite some of its flaws, we do like the way the system works. It's just nice not having a start button. And I find myself getting out of this car and into petrol cars and then leaving them running for a few seconds before I realize it's just a good feature. It allows you to just get in the car, foot on the brake, and make a really quick getaway. Nice feature overall. And I've got to say, it's good to see cars going this way in the electric era. And just to recap, these seats, they're only cloth trimmed and there's no heating or anything on them or power adjustment. They're pretty comfortable. We've got this nice blue stitching to set the cabin apart from what is an otherwise pretty big sea of black. Decent storage on here, open storage, glove box in there as well, small center console bin, and overall pretty nice place to be. I will say these cup holders are quite short and far away, particularly if you have something like a coffee that has quite a sensitive lid. They're not the best for that, but they do fit. Other things, instrument display is clear, not the most complex in terms of its graphics, but it does work and does do the job. Steering wheel is quite nice, only 2 spokes. The buttons, you do get used to them. They're not marked particularly well, but you do figure out what they do over time. The wheel is quite big. I don't mind that. I kind of like the way it feels in my hands, but not everyone will. Now, while we're here, there's only wired Apple CarPlay, not wireless, but it only runs through this USB-A port, not the USB-C. Not the biggest thing, just get the right cable for it in the end. But I have noticed it's not the most reliable, even with a software update that we got done to this car while it's in our garage. More on that a little bit later. You find yourself, if you plug in the phone too quickly before starting the car or setting off, it just won't connect properly and it'll just need an unplug and a replug of the phone. Not the biggest thing, it's just something that's annoying and to be honest, happens probably 50% of the time we drive the car. Just unnecessary and something MG could definitely improve on in that area. Now, in terms of build quality and wear and tear over the 3 months we've had this car, this gloss black section in the middle does attract quite a bit of dust, but to be honest, that's nothing new. Gloss black in all cars just attracts dust and isn't the most attractive material over time when you start to use the vehicle. We'll say on the doors, you might be able to see this attracts marks really easily. We've not been putting anything on it, no liquid, no substances or anything. It just attracts marks and dust. You can wipe it off. There aren't many squeaks or rattles in this car. I will say there is a bit of a squeak from the driver's side belt buckle. That's probably something that we've done, gotten the car a little bit too firmly. Other than that, there's no obvious quality issues, trim falling apart or anything like that. Overall, we like the way the car is, though again, it's not perfect. Let's head to the back. Now, since our last video, we've had a few more passengers in the back here, including 3 abreast, and I've got to say, there have been no real complaints, at least for a car of this size. Decent knee room for the class, good headroom as well, and some toe room under the seat, even with it in its lowest position. Now, it is a pretty basic space back here. There's only one USB port, nothing in the way of map pockets, no center armrest, no rear air vents, nothing really special. Some cars in the class do have that, even at this price, but then again, space is pretty good, and there's not too much you can complain about other than that. Could be better, but also could be a whole lot worse. Check out the boot. Now, towards the end of the loan, we spent a bit more time loading up the boot, and I've got to say, it is a pretty good size. Obviously, it's still a small car. It's not a medium-sized SUV, but you can fit a full-size suitcase in that. It's not something you'll fit in a BYD Dolphin all that easily. It is still annoying. There's nowhere to store these charging cables. They just roll around in the boot, and if you're enjoying the car's handling and driving it a little bit quickly, they do move about a bit. Again, a bit annoying. There's no frunk under the bonnet there to fit these either. They just sort of roll around the space, and I wish there was somewhere to put them. You do have some storage on the side here, a little net pocket, and the seats do fold down, though they don't really fold down flat. Though obviously 60-40 split, so you can still put someone back there if you're trying to fit a longer item. Overall, not much to complain about with the boot of the MG4. If you're enjoying this video, why not hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all the latest content from Drive.com.au. It's here on the road where the MG4 really stands out against its peers. We spoke before about how zippy this car is to drive. It's got 125 kilowatts in a car that does 0 to 100 in 7.8 seconds, according to our stopwatch. And I've got to say, by no means does it ever feel slow. Put it in sport mode, give it a bit of a burst, and there is more than enough punch for day-to-day driving and also to enjoy the car at the right moment. Of course, this car is rear-wheel drive, and you can definitely feel that in the way it handles. You can feel it pushing you rather than pulling you out of bends, and you can get the rear of the car to break loose if you're being a little bit too aggressive with the accelerator. For the most part, road holding is very good. Accurate steering that's a little bit too light for some taste, but is pretty accurate and quite direct. These Continental tyres are, for the most part, pretty good, and it's just a really, really fun car to drive. It encourages you to drive it hard, and it's just really enjoyable every time we've put this car on a country road to have a bit of fun with it. It's quite composed at higher speeds. It doesn't get unsettled by bumps or undulations in the road. As we mentioned, it's rear-wheel drive, so it's really, really enjoyable. It just encourages you to drive harder, though. Of course, the energy consumption does suffer when you're enjoying it. We'll talk about that bit in a minute. Around town, the ride is on the firmer side. It definitely doesn't cushion bumps as well as something like a BYD Dolphin, but I have to say it is quite composed in how it goes over bumps. It settles really quickly after a speed bump or even a pothole in the road, and you do get used to that little bit of firmness in the ride over time. We're certainly not going any fonder of the noise. There's a bit of a resonance through the back of the car and a bit of a boominess on loud surfaces. You may be able to hear it on this road we're on now. It does get quite annoying after a lot of city driving and really poorly surfaced roads that we have in Australia. In terms of things we've noticed, not a whole lot to say that we've discovered compared to our initial thoughts. It's just a really easy and really enjoyable car to drive in all situations. I've loved darting around town in this car compared to some of the petrol and diesel cars that we have come through the garage. Just really enjoyable and just a great little city runabout that can also hold its own on a country road. All right, let's talk about how much we spent. Over our 3 months with the MG4, we covered 3,119 kilometres over a broad mix of city, country and highway driving, and returned energy consumption of 16.6 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, compared to MG's claim of 18.4 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres. The number you've been waiting for. We spent a total of $371.35 on charging the car, which equates to just under 12 cents per kilometre. That's across 19 charging sessions in Sydney and country New South Wales, priced between 58 and 92 cents per kilowatt hour. Let's put that into some context. If we completed 80% of our charging on off-peak electricity at home at a rate of 20 cents per kilowatt hour, and the remaining 20% on cheaper fast charges at 60 cents per kilowatt hour, we would have spent just $153.71, or just 5 cents per kilometre. How does that compare to the price of petrol? Well, assuming a petrol car that consumes 8 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres, at a fuel price of $1.90 a litre, our long-term test distance would have cost $474.13, or about 15 cents per kilometre. But choose a more efficient hybrid car, such as a Toyota Corolla hybrid that uses 5 litres per 100 kilometres, and cheaper fuel costing $1.70 a litre, the total cost drops to just $265.14, or 9 cents per kilometre. So the petrol car is now actually cheaper than the EV on public charging. In short, running an EV on public charging is more expensive than a fuel-efficient petrol hybrid car, but not if you recharge the electric car at home. So as promised, we're going to answer some of your questions that you've had over the time that we've had this MG4 in the Drive garage. First up, question from Doug74 on YouTube. Your test car doesn't have the update of one pedal driving and phantom braking reconfiguration. Maybe you should get it updated before you really test it. Well, you're exactly right. Since the first MG4s arrived in Australia about 12 months ago, there have been a couple of software updates along the way. We've had those installed on this car since we filmed that first intro video. Among them, these Excite 51s now have a one pedal drive mode. So it means you can lift off the accelerator and the car will come to a full stop rather than it getting to about 5 or 10 k's an hour. And then you need to hit the brakes to take the load off that regenerative braking system. It does work quite well around town. It just makes driving around the city that little bit easier. It's a really nice feature to have. There've also been some improvements to the safety system as well. So the adaptive cruise control is now a little bit smoother in its operation. You can now control it in 1 km/h increments far more easily than you could before. And it doesn't slow down for very small bends in the road as significantly as it did before. Really good change there. Also the lane centering system, which means the one that keeps you in the middle of the lane on the highway, is better calibrated, and there are fewer false positives from the autonomous emergency braking system. Now we haven't had any what you can call phantom braking, which means the car brakes for something, there's no obstacle in front, it thinks there's an obstacle and slams on the brakes. We haven't had that in our time with this car, but the improvements to the forward collision warning would tell us that system has probably been improved, and that won't happen as much with this software update. Next question is from Daniel Hocken on YouTube. Will you be testing the discharging to vehicle to load? So vehicle to load is where you can plug external devices, so a blender, a shaver, something like that, into a power plug in this car and run it off the car's battery. We haven't done much of that during our time with this car as part of this whole not charging it at home thing to try and focus on public charging stations. But the car does have it if you want to use it, whether that's on a campsite, plugging something in, or charging a computer or something like that on the road. Next question is from Jamie on the Drive website, asking us to test highway driving range at 110 kilometers an hour, as well as charging speed. Now we put this car through the same highway range test loop we use for a number of other electric cars that come through the Drive garage. I'll put the efficiency we got on screen there, as well as what that translates to in driving range. Safe to say, in your question, that the 64 kilowatt hour version is probably the better bet, or even the 77 kilowatt hour model rather than this 51. You can probably make it with more charging stops. It's just going to be less convenient and a lot more range anxiety along the way. In terms of charging speed, we tested this car from 10 to 80% on a fast charger in 34 minutes and 50 seconds, which is not too bad in terms of the size of this car and the battery it has. Only 50 kilowatt hours, and it only charges up to 85 kilowatts. MG says it'll do 88, so it is in that ballpark. 34 minutes is not particularly short, but it's also not particularly long. We've driven plenty of EVs, something like a BYD or a Hyundai Kona Electric that will charge slower than this, and say 30 to 35 minutes is about that sweet spot for how long you want to be spending at a charger if you're going to go get lunch, go to the shops or something like that. It's okay, but then again, you're only getting 300 k's of range for that time, so maybe you might want to step up to one of the higher models in the range can charge at up to 140 kilowatts and cut that time to about 25 minutes and then get more driving range in the process. Next question is from Bill, asking, reviews like these are interesting, but you often ignore a critical input every time. You need to identify the maximum level and type of charge a car can take, and he's asking what charge rate can the MG use. You do raise a really good point there. There's two different metrics in terms of charging you need to understand when you're buying a car like this. Both what charging power the car can accept, as well as the charging power of the charging station you're going to. So for example, you're pulling up at a 350 kilowatt charger in this car, it doesn't really matter because it can only do 85. It won't accept the full 350. On the other hand, you have something like a Tesla Model 3 long range that will do 250 kilowatts charging from the car. Pull up to a 50 kilowatt charging station, you're only going to get 50 kilowatts and you're not going to get the full circa 30-minute charge that you would in that car. Two things to remember, and obviously we've been charging this car mostly around town, and because it's not a fast charging car, we've not been going out of our way to try and find 350 kilowatt chargers or even 200 kilowatt chargers. Just been doing a lot of 50 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt and things like that. Over the loan, we spent 15 hours and 10 minutes at charging stations. Or to put it another way, about 9 minutes for every hour driven on the road. Of that time, about 15% of it was spent waiting to charge, dealing with broken chargers, or something else that did not involve the vehicle actually taking on energy. Along the way, we've had plenty of sour experiences of other drivers hogging charging bays, charging stations being broken, plugs not connecting, and chargers in car parks with poor mobile signal. Here are a few clips of some of our experiences. So here at a charger in a city, as you can see, this one is broken. Screen dead, no matter how many times you press it. It says screen broken, use the app, but when you go on the app, you can't start the charge, nor does the RFID tag up here work. You can see only 3 chargers here, one 350, one 60 kilowatt with CCS and CHAdeMO. But yeah, it just doesn't work. It's one of the many problems with this, and when you have a broken charger, it cuts your charging capacity by a third basically, so you've got 3 bays and only 2 cars can use them. Really frustrating, especially for a Sunday morning. All right, so we're here charging the MG4. You can see in Wallara in Sydney's east, and 75 kilowatt EV charger over there. You can see plugged in. Cars accepted my payment, but it won't start charging. You can see 0, 0, 0 on everything. This pulsar here told me that apparently this charger just doesn't work. It doesn't seem to do the handshake with the car for some reason. It tells me on the EV app that it started charging and that charging is idle, but for some reason it's not accepting any energy. Even if you hold it in, it doesn't work. You can see over there, I'll zoom in on that, you might be able to see it. It's been charging for 1 minute. Yeah, doesn't work. Just one of the many pitfalls of public EV charging. For all those bad experiences, we've had some good ones. Plenty of fast, well-priced chargers near food and with no queues. We've also been keeping track of how much money we've spent on food, drinks and other items while the car charges, that we otherwise wouldn't have bought if we had a petrol car with 2-minute refills. It amounts to $240 over the 3 months. For example, including breakfast meals that we would have had at home for far less, soft drinks and newspapers. So those are some things you got to keep in mind if you're looking at an EV. Now, if you are in the market for an MG4 or any other type of EV, head over to Drive Marketplace. We've got a ton of new, near new and used examples available for purchase from a bunch of different dealers across Australia. Head to the link on your screen now. Now, for all that, 3 months and thousands of Ks with this car, the answer to the question we posed at the start of this test, can you and should you live with an EV without the ability to charge it at home? Well, the hard truth, and I really hate to say it, is just no. It's really hard to recommend one of these cars given the state of Australia's fast charging network, the queues, other drivers hogging spaces, the broken chargers, and the myriad of other issues and niggles that just take the shine off the experience. And with all due respect, we need to see better etiquette from other EV drivers if the switch to electric cars is to work. Too many times are there other drivers parked in charging bays not using them, or hogging the chargers to get to 100%. Because after all, that last 20% can take as long as the first 80. Everyone with an EV is in the same boat. Everyone's time is worthwhile. We need to be more considerate as a society if we're all going to be driving EVs in the future. Now, if you have home charging, should you buy an EV? Well, if you don't drive long distances all the time, it's a very easy sell. Now, as for the MG4, we've loved our time with this car. If you enjoy driving as much as we do in the Drive office, this is a fantastic car, what is essentially a base model $40,000 small hatchback. It's not lavishly equipped for the money, but it's roomy inside, it's great to drive on the road, and gets all the basics right. We're really, really big fans of this car. And if you have home charging, this is a great recommendation if you're looking for an electric car at this price point. How does it compare to a BYD Dolphin? Well, you'll have to click the link in the description below to head to the Drive website to find out. What do you think? Would you still have one of these cars even if you couldn't charge it at home? Let us know in the comments below. To watch a high-spec MG4 go up against some of its rivals from BYD and GWM, click the link up there to watch that video. And of course, for all you need to know about this car and our testing, head to Drive.com.au, the link in the description.